And welcome back to Football Weather. A little mishap there, but hey, we want to play a little more of the intro music anyway. It never hurts. Maybe we'll get a record deal out of that at some point. I don't know. Probably not. But welcome back. It's week 1 officially of the college football season. Week 0 is in the can, and there was some interesting stuff. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show and reveal the template that we're going to be using for the football weather rankings throughout the course of the season, a methodology that we made up largely through text messages, but we think has some promise. Matt Blaska back with me as always. Matt, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Today was one of those days where you're never going to forget where you were. And I'm curious where you were when Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce got engaged.
Am I allowed to say I don't care, and I don't even remember where I was when I saw it? Is that allowed? Like, do I get canceled off the internet? I think I do. I thought we were done canceling people, but that might be the thing that brings it all back. I was in a meeting.
Yeah, me too.
It's funny, in the Back Home Network cinematic universe, I'm there and I'm looking at my phone, and I didn't even see a note. All I saw was something that popped up, and it was like the picture of her holding the ring up or whatever, embracing. And I immediately text the group text that we have for Sideline Stories, the Sidney Parrish and Trissa Whitaker podcast. Yeah. And I didn't even explain. I just like, are you guys going to do an emergency pod or what? And Sydney responds with, never been so needed as now. And I don't think Trisha had seen yet because she was teaching at the time. So it's funny. It's great. Good for them. Those crazy kids might just make it after all. It's delightful. How about you? Where were you at?
I was also in a meeting, and then I left. And then the amount of students I talked to were just so excited about this. And I'm just like, it's great. I'm glad Schefter got to break the news, I guess. I don't know. One of those moments, in pop culture, I guess.
I do wonder, and we're not going to get into this anymore because this is one of those things where nothing that you or I say could do anything but get us into trouble. But I do worry, generally speaking, when artists who have made their life's work writing songs about emotional distress and heartbreak and bad relationships, when they find happiness and get married, they tend to lose their edge from a songwriting and melodic perspective as well as lyrics. So it's interesting, all these people celebrating this, and it's happy news, it's great news, but it could be negative as far as the actual art is concerned. I'm curious how that gets navigated.
Yeah, I'm going to leave it there too. You we don't need the negative comments on our YouTube page regarding Taylor Swift.
We're just asking questions. That's what people do these days, right? Anyway, we will be not talking anymore about Taylor Swift. That's it. But we do want to talk about Home Field Apparel, our presenting sponsor on the Back Home Network, and the place where we both got our relative pieces of apparel here. You went with the Never Daunted hoodie. Mm-hmm. It really does feel like football weather outside, does it not? We need to talk about that first and foremost.
It is beautiful out. I mean, I had to go back inside to get a sweatshirt this morning just to bring it. I mean, our office has been freezing because I don't think we're ready for it.
No,
it's great. I mean, it's gonna be a beautiful Labor Day Saturday. I know it's in August still. It's an early Labor Day, but I mean, I can't remember an opening weekend where it's going to be in the upper 70s for most of the day. It's going to be awesome this weekend around the country, just not here, around the country.
Yeah, it's gonna be a really nice weather week, and it's been great the last couple of weeks. And after the bad summer we've had in Indiana in terms of just constant rain and feeling like we're in Rangoon or something outside as opposed to whatever. It's really one of those things where it really has brought that feeling of football back, and you always like to see that. And Home Field Apparel, of course, can outfit you for all levels of weather outside during football season for college, whether you're going full hoodie like Matt is wearing, whether you need like a long sleeve tee, whether you've got now this is a short sleeve, but this is the heavyweight. And I'm not normally a big heavyweight guy, but to show the audience, like it's a nice, like, says Hoosiers on it, obviously. And it's not, I normally like a good tri-blend, like that's kind of my jam. But this is actually, I ran it through the washer once. It's very good. It's rugged. This kind of reminds me of the shirts that I wore. Remember back in the dark days, like pre-home field, people caring about what they wore when it felt like every single T-shirt was like heavyweight cotton.
Yep.
So, and I've noticed the kids are into that, and I like it occasionally, like this shirt. But Home Field's got you covered with all these different types of fabrics and all these different designs. This is like the 80th different Indiana design that they've had, where they've got great designs for all these other college football programs, and you should take advantage of that. Go to Home Field Apparel, use the code HOME23, get 15% off your first order. Check them out on Instagram. They just debuted a new brick and mortar store here in Bloomington. Maybe there'll be more of those coming. They'll certainly have pop-up stores across the country as they do their national tour of college football. So keep an eye out for that as well. Let's go ahead and jump in, Matt. And I think the big news, we didn't get a chance to talk about it before the show last time, but the SEC either caves or we're going to do it all along, but they announced that they're going to move to a system where they're going to require 9 conference games being scheduled, big jump up from 8. It's really one of those things where all of this stupid debate and arguing back and forth and people insulting other people, it's kind of all been for naught. And it's interesting because the SEC making this move, I think, had to happen regardless of what happens with the playoff. But it is funny from a timing perspective. They went from supportive of it generally back in spring to then they get to SEC Media Day and suddenly it's like, well, no, we like our schedules as they currently are, to now back to this again. And the argument's been, well, that was what they were planning on doing, but it sure didn't sound like it for most of the summer.
Right. Well, we had the news on late last week of the strength of schedule metric that was going to be introduced for 2025. And then the very next day we see the Big Ten, the SEC go to 9 games. It's very curious. It's very similar to when they approved this playoff. The presidents got involved and the ADs got involved and said, ESPN's offering us more money. So, well, where are we going to go with this? We're going to go play 9. We're going to play 9 conference games. So yes, the timing is interesting. Certainly the wording of their press release, the team are the standard of college football is going to be playing 9 conference games and 1 other P4 school is required, which a lot of them already play that. So that's certainly a throwaway line to add. But certainly it's an interesting dynamic as we've talked about, and Indiana has been a poster child for this with their scheduling, how they're going to manage this, because there are some of these neutral site games, specifically Georgia, Florida, and Oklahoma, Texas. How's that going to work for their home games? Would they get a 4-4-1 split? When you have the 5 road games, you want to have 7 home games. I tweeted this on our Football Weather account. Schools want those 7 home games. Hence, that was probably one of the reasons why IU canceled that Virginia series. They wanted the 7th home game that year. So I don't think the SEC fans, while they can beat their chest about this, don't really understand that a lot of the games that they maybe have scheduled, Alabama canceled one today. They have picked up East Carolina and canceled West Virginia.
And of course, they got roundly criticized by Brett McMurphy and everybody. Of course not. It was just like, oh, hey, no problem at all. Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And for them, yeah, I mean, you can't be going like Georgia, I think in 2027 has 12 FBS or Power 4 games. That is unlikely going to stick because you're going to be playing 12 and then maybe a conference championship. Then as many playoff games as Georgia plays historically, they're probably not going to want to do that. So while they can beat their chest all they want, things are going to change where they can't play these games. Now, from the Big Ten perspective, let's look at the Big Ten, right? Kurt Cignetti called them out and said, well, I'm just going to adopt the SEC schedule methodology. They scheduled a bunch of non-P4 games and for 26 and 28. And obviously it's made the rounds that they've done this. I'm curious if now there will be a Big Ten or SEC or Power 4 agreement to schedule that extra non-conference P4 game. And then the other 2 games would be an FCS and a group of 5, group of 6 game. So at least they're still supporting their schools or supporting their maybe in-state rivals, for example, Indiana, maybe with Indiana State and Michigan State or Michigan supporting Eastern Michigan, Western Michigan. I'm curious if that will be the move for the Big Ten, as well as probably the Big 12 and the ACC, although they seem to just play non-conference games within their own conference. So maybe that they'll keep that methodology going forward.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what happens with this. I mean, look, ultimately, the SEC had to move first if there was going to be any kind of a coming together of a general idea on the playoff and how it was going to feed into that. And I think it's interesting that the SEC, I guess because they're trying to score style points with the committee this year, announced this whole, well, you're going to have to schedule a Power 4 conference opponent next year.
Right.
But it's kind of an odd move because I think to some degree there may be a better route to going about this than that approach, because I don't think it's going to necessarily matter that much in terms of your playoff positioning. Losing an additional game while also playing 9 conference games is going to disadvantage you. I mean, the idea that one, if you lose that game, if you're the SEC team, the idea that one loss is going to count the same as a win, it kind of goes contrary to everything that we've been hearing about what matters from the committee in terms of wins. They still would prefer to see you win games rather than lose games. And so I think this has got to be the first step in a larger restructuring of not just how the committee decides to go about this, but also in looking at how the Big Ten and the SEC are going to look at this whole equation and say, well, here's what we're going to need to do to standardize this. And this is something we talked about a couple of weeks ago. It's this idea that you've got these, what I'm finding to be incredibly annoying, kind of, they claim to be purists in college football who, they want non-conference matchups that matter, and they want the regular season to matter, but they refuse to acknowledge the huge inequities in the way that the scheduling pieces together the season, how these are incomplete sample sizes, even all this resistance, not just to auto bids, but to an expanded playoff. This idea that somehow, the regular season's got to matter. It's like right now, the regular season is unrepresentative. So I don't know how you can claim that it matters if you don't really know who the best 12 teams are, because they're not playing each other enough. And so I look at this and I say the SEC's approach is 3 annual opponents, 6 games rotating amongst the remaining conference schools, which is not too different from what the Big Ten has right now, although the Big Ten really, I think, only has, is it like 1 or 2 locked-in opponents?
Yeah, so this was the original Big Ten plan before they had Oregon and Washington join, the 3-6, yeah.
And so what I look at now as we move forward with all of this is this idea that the SEC and the Big Ten are clearly going to be leading the way when it comes to setting this agenda. And the ideal thing would be obviously just to have these 2 conferences play each other in that extra power conference game. But you don't have the numbers the same. That's a problem. You got 16 teams in one league, got 18 in another. But you've also, as you pointed out, you've got non-conference rivalries like Clemson, South Carolina, that don't fit into that paradigm particularly well. And so what do you do about that? And again, I think this is where you really need to pull the lens back a little bit and say, what would be best for the sport as a whole at this level? Not what would be best for all 130 teams, because I just don't think that that's an achievable thing right now. But what would be best in terms of actually trying to figure out who the best teams are, and how do, as much as we want to say Power 4, it's not the Power 4. Yeah, it's really the Power 2. And I guess Notre Dame's going to be allowed to stick around in this. But again, you brought this up on the last show, and I've heard other people bring it up, and it's a great point. So now the Big Ten is going to play a 9-game conference schedule. Yeah, and that's going to vary in quality and power. But this year, as we looked at, it's pretty tough for everybody. Like, nobody really has an easy draw. You've got the SEC schedule, which again is going to be tough for pretty much everybody. The idea that Notre Dame is going to be able to sit there, cherry pick which games they want, and then be able to sprinkle in an SEC game or two, the chances of Georgia being like, we'll play Notre Dame, that's probably not happening. Alabama, probably not happening, because those teams are going to lock in opponents already in that structure. So is Notre Dame going to get the benefit of playing like Mississippi State or somebody like that? It's going to be interesting to see how all that equates, because it's just not equal. And yet that's really how we're moving forward with things. And I got to think at some point someone's going to say, we need to have a more holistic view of this that isn't just the SEC's doing this and then the Big Ten's over here doing its own thing. We need to come up with something that's a little more structured.
Well, I did wonder if Petiti knew that, or not Petiti, if Sankey knew that this was going to happen on Wednesday and Thursdays, then call Petiti and say, hey, here's what we're doing. This is our first step. And maybe, let's put the playoff aside. They've been talking about this potential scheduling agreement. So maybe this is the first step to say, hey, we need to make this sport better for everybody and make this sport better for the power too. So we'll go to 9, you're at 9. We'll continue to talk about the playoff, but let's also consider how we can make these non-conference games better for the fans, which it's never happened, but I'm curious if that was actually in the conversation, because it certainly led itself to believe that that's a possibility. Now, you brought up an interesting point I was going to bring up as well with Notre Dame. And we talked about this a couple shows ago. They're getting boxed out now even more because, like you said, now there's 9 less or 8 less opportunities now for them to play a game against these schools. And you add those South Carolina, Clemson games and all those in there. Now those schools are already at those 10 games. And then you add the Big Ten, who already scheduled some of their 10th non-conference game. We know they have the 5 ACC games, and I believe the Clemson-Florida State thing starts next year because they really need to play those teams.
Right.
And the Notre Dame USC issue that's currently going out there. It begs to wonder that with the power that as the SEC and the Big Ten have, how much longer Notre Dame can go in this not being in a conference, because the closer we get to 29 and 30, and as these conferences potentially go bigger again, and Notre Dame's not going to have that option, and they're not going to want to stick with the Boston colleges. Sorry, Boston College fans or Syracuse fans. It's just not going to happen. Like they want to play a schedule, a national schedule, and they're just not going to be able to do it because the schools are not going to want to play that 11th or in 12th power 2, power 4, whatever we're going to call it, right, game. It's not going to be good for those schools.
Right.
The athletes are not going to want it. And then you add the playoff on top of it. You're talking for some of these schools, 15 power 4 games. It's not sustainable for a good product on the field, especially when you get to the playoff, when you want to be at your best.
Yeah, I think ultimately what we're going to see happen with all of this is there's going to have to be, first of all, a sense ahead of time of who's actually going to remain in the ACC and the Big 12. And we talked about this a long time ago, as that may have been the first or second episode that we did. And I'd recommend going back and checking that out. This whole idea of, the idea that in this next cycle, with all the changes that have happened in the ACC grant of rights and how much easier it's going to be, relatively speaking, to buy oneself out of that conference, you've got free agency in the teams that are going to matter. And this SEC scheduling, to me, looks like one of those things where it will work if there are additional teams added. And you and I talked about it. There's probably 6 total spots potentially between the Big Ten and the SEC. Right. And that may be it. Like you may stop at 38. You may end up going to 40. It's going to depend on who's viable. Who do you want in your conference? Who do you not want in your conference? And who does the other conference want if you don't want a particular team? And we talked about the list of potentials within that mix. And one of the things that you run into is, let's say we go through this realignment, and let's say Notre Dame's like, no, we're going to stay the same. We're going to stay independent. We can schedule accordingly. But then Clemson, Florida State both say, and Miami, they're like, well, we're taking off, and 2 of those teams join the SEC, and one of those teams joins the Big Ten, and maybe you get one team out of the Big 12 that jumps over. Maybe you get a couple, but you're left with even less impressive, secondary power 2 conferences. I don't even know how you would pronounce or how you would term them. But now you've got this clear tiered system where it's like, well, each of those teams will probably get one game against a Big Ten or an SEC opponent. If you're in the ACC, post Clemson leaving, post Florida State leaving. But I don't see how that equates into the actual playoff. I don't see how that, like you're gonna take those into account because their games being played, and maybe the conference winner in one of those gets something in terms of a bid. But this is where the automatic qualifier model is really going to be interesting, because all of these people who are like, oh, the SEC changed their scheduling approach, now we'll go with the 5+11 model, kind of ignores the fact that the whole rationale that the SEC had for the 5+11 model was that they didn't want to play 9 conference games. At least that's how it was being flowed. That's how I understood it, at least.
Yeah, and if you're looking just at this past year, the ACC was lucky to get 2 teams in, right? So to your point, the ACC, the Big 12, and the Group of 5 would have had their 3 spots, and the Big 10 and the SEC would have had the other 9, right? Is that right? So like there would have, it's only, and the next 2 spots were SEC schools. So you're right. The window is narrowing for what these schools or what the spots are going to look like. So it's almost like these next 4 years for the middling or middle tier of the Big 12 and the ACC is kind of like a showcase. Like, show us you belong, if you will. Like a school like Virginia Tech, for example, we didn't really talk about what they put together. Their AD put out, hey, here's what we got to do if we want to be competitive, right? In this new landscape. Then they were, the national championship 25 years ago. I know it's a long time ago, but they built a decent program, but they've been have not been heard of since. So who are going to be those 3 or 4 teams, or maybe that are vying for 2 spots, right? Yeah. And that's the most it's going to be. And that's where a lot of these schools need to figure out where they want to invest their money. And if it's going to be FBS football, well, they better start yesterday. Otherwise they're going to be left behind, unfortunately.
Let's move on to something a little bit happier. We'll keep an eye on this though, because I'm very fascinated by how all this is going to play out. But no, let's talk about week 0 and what we saw during that week. There were a variety of interesting games. A couple of them were close. What stuck out to you, Matt? Let me start with you on this.
The one thing I was in and out of the Kansas State Iowa game. I was thinking that was the game that I watched probably the most.
By the way, the offenses were also in and out of the Kansas State Iowa State game. It was not a well played game. It was entertaining, but it was not well played.
No, it was the first 2 possessions. There was a fumble and someone fumbled. It was an ugly game, almost like a game you would expect for the first game of the season, in the rain, in Dublin. All these varying factors. It's kind of what I expected for an Iowa State Kansas State game, a 3-point game. Those are 2 of the top 4 teams in the conference. It wouldn't be surprising if they saw each other again in the U.S. in the conference championship game. But now Kansas State has some work to do because it's going to be really difficult to run the table, right? So that's the one thing that stood out to me. The other one was a team that really lost a lot of close games last year and played a home game for the first time in a couple of years. Kansas. I know it was Fresno State. They're not the greatest opponent, but they look pretty darn good. Both offensively and defensively. And I think they're going to be a problem in the Big 12 this year. Maybe not a chance to win the conference, but I think they'll certainly give people a lot of problems like they have in the years past. Leopold's one of the better coaches, in the country. And obviously had a fall off, but certainly I would be, if I'm a Big 12 fan, I think Kansas is going to be a horn of people's sides. And then I didn't watch, we were just texting about the Hawaii Stanford game. I didn't really see a lot of it, but just Stanford's going to be in for a long season. Losing that game the way they lost it, I saw it later. They're in trouble. They're looking at a 2 or 1 win season probably.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of go down the list on those, Kansas is intriguing. They came in 50th in the preseason S&P Plus rankings, and good offense, bad defense, but they were playing a Fresno State team that really couldn't take advantage of the defensive issues that Kansas has. And, look, I mean, I'd like to see Kansas get back on track in the Big 12. They really did have a dip last year after what had been a couple of really good seasons before that. But I was fairly impressed, and that stadium looks really nice. That's not a stadium, a stadium that you've thought of as being like, a great place to watch college football, but it was good looking. The Iowa State Kansas State game was interesting in as much as it was not a great game from an efficiency standpoint for Iowa State, but they got the job done at the end. And the weather was terrible. I mean, it was wet. You've been to that game, and it's Ireland. Like, that's what you get out there. Yeah. There's many reasons why they don't use their hands for football in the British Isles, but one of them is just too damn slippery half the time. Right. So, but that was a fun kind of almost frivolous game, not in terms of the outcome, because the outcome I think really does matter, like you said, for the Big 12 title race, but it felt at times like no one could get their footing literally and figuratively. And then obviously you have the way that it ended, and it was entertaining. It was an entertaining way to start things off. And that Stanford Hawaii game was a fascinating one. I watched most of the second half of that game, and Stanford should have won. And this is where we'll talk about the ramifications of this in just a second. But I feel like Stanford, they've got some things to build off of. I really thought Ford had a great running game, 26 carries, 113 yards, ran for a score, and they were in a position to win, if they'd wanted to at the end. But it was also, I think, the more daunting aspect for Stanford in all of this is not even necessarily the outcome, but they got outgained by Hawaii, 306 to 286. They got outpassed by an almost 2-1 margin. Despite Stanford having a ton of time of possession, they could never figure out a way to put the game away. They made some bad coaching decisions down the stretch. So as a result, I think it's one of those situations where you look at it and you say to yourself, well, they are going to have a long year, but I don't know that necessarily it means Hawaii is particularly good. I just think Stanford was really bad that day.
Yeah, I don't think Hawaii is going to be a great team either. It's just that, for Stanford to get off the mat, to lose that game, not that the ACC, the schedule is going to be, it's because they had to travel across the country quite a bit. They're just in for a long year. And I know they fired the coach in April, and they brought Andrew Luck in to kind of right the ship here, but it's unfortunate what's happened to Stanford with, the transfer portal. It's definitely to get guys in there. It's just a really tough job. And, your old friend Frank Wright here in Indianapolis, making those great coaching decisions once again. So it's unfortunate that they're going to be in for probably a really difficult year. To kind of switch gears, nice to see Western Kentucky start off the season. They are they're probably a sleeper for the Group of 5 spot, but they've consistently been that 8-4, 9-3 team over the last couple of years, and they certainly put up a lot of points this week against Sam Houston and won their first conference game. So obviously we'll watch them throughout the season to see how they play into this Group of 5 spot, but they're one to watch down and probably the next tier of teams in the Group of 5.
Yeah, Western Kentucky is interesting because they got through that game against Sam Houston and won handily. They got to go to Toledo. That's going to be a tough game. They've got that in a couple of weeks. And if they can get through that game, it's a fairly manageable schedule. They got a couple of tough road games. And then they got LSU, the second to last game of the season, which would not matter at all, I don't think. And, even if they got blown out, I don't think anybody's going to hold that against them if they were in contention for, that fifth spot. So that's going to be really fascinating to see with them. I don't know if they would be the ones I would necessarily bet on, but I'm curious to see what they can do this year, because they certainly look better than UNLV, who really looked bad in that game against Idaho State. That was not a good showing by the first game of the Dan Mullen era, I would say.
They took that $1.5 million to move that game and said, we'll play it. We'll just do the best we can, because that was not a very pretty. Every time I looked up, I'm like, how is this still a game? Idaho State is not good. They're not good at all. This should not be close.
So it leads us, before we get to the slate for week one, and there's a ton of games going on with it, but we are going to debut something on Football Weather this year, which is our own rankings system. And this is going to be a little complicated for us to keep track of, but I think we're both committed to it. We're trying to watch as much football as possible. And one of the big complaints that I've had about college football rankings is that, as you've heard me complain about ad nauseum, there's not enough games to get a clear sense of who's actually good and not good. And then you've also got the secondary issue of you've got a ton of bias in the system about who people think should be good, as opposed to what's happening on the field. So what we're going to do is come up with our own ranking system where we track essentially every game, all the outcomes, and try to get a sense not affected by last year, not affected by program prestige, but instead just wins and losses and what we perceive the overall strengths to be of who the top 25 teams are in the country in a given week. And so coming into this week, we don't have full rankings, and we're going to wait until we actually have a full slate of games having been played where everybody's got at least one game under their belt. But my preliminary rankings that I sent to Matt are as follows. We have Iowa State number 1, Kansas State number 2, Kansas 3rd, Western Kentucky 4th, UNLV 5th, Stanford 6th, Hawaii 7th, Fresno 8th, and Sam Houston State 9th. And your question immediately was Stanford ahead of Hawaii? That doesn't make a lot of sense. But my philosophy on that was I think they had a bad game, and as bad of a game as they had, they nearly beat Hawaii on the road, which is another thing that I want to try to take into account with this
Road
method
games.
is road games. Because it's like what I find fundamentally bizarre about college football pundits and college football writers and broadcasters is they seem to give zero attention to what is generally a pretty big deal in home field advantage, in terms of who's playing who and who's winning what games. And I think the idea that it doesn't matter is kind of silly, or the idea that, well, that team beat that team, therefore they're better than that team, even though you're not really thinking about it on a neutral field. You're thinking about it, in the context of, well, they beat them at home. So we're going to try to take all that into account as well.
I think we learned a lot last year in the first round of the playoff, how much home field mattered. Yeah, certainly, the 4 winners were clear. They were dominant at home in a home environment that's never existed before. None of those games were relatively close, really, right? The closest one was probably the Clemson-Texas game for the whole game.
Right.
But the home teams should be weighted in a way that they're hosting. So, a 3-point loss on the road is, in according to Vegas, is basically, tie, if you will, or whatever it happens to look like. It's clearly the Big 12 is dominate the rankings this week with the top 3 spots with Iowa State, Kansas State, and Kansas. But I kind of like how we're going to do this, and we're both going to come up with our own and chat before the show to see where we both land for watching. And this week's going to be interesting because there is, and we're going to get into this in a second, there's 3 top 10 matchups for the first time ever in week 1. So we're going to get a good sense of how those pundits rank those teams. If Georgia goes out, not Georgia, if Texas goes out and wins by 30, well, that would probably tell us a lot about Texas and probably tell us a lot about Ohio State pretty here early on. But certainly, I think it's going to be an interesting way for us to dive into this throughout the season and see how those blocks form from week 1 to week 2 to week 3.
Let's go ahead and preview some of the games that we've got coming up here in week 1. First of all, it's a packed schedule from Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, when that first one's sneaky good.
Yeah, Boise State at South Florida. Boise State ranked 25th in the country. They're a 6.5-point favorite in this game. That's a 5:30 kick on ESPN. It'll be a fun way to kind of kick off the extended Labor Day weekend, obviously. But then it just kind of keeps going. Rutgers starts at 6 o'clock. That's obviously not going to be a top-level game. But, you go through that first day. You've got a couple of games that are really intriguing. Nebraska at Cincinnati. I would expect Nebraska would probably win that, but that could be a little bit of a tricky game because Cincinnati, they've got some – they're being quarterbacked by a guy who quarterbacked in the Big Ten. They've got some decent talent. And we still don't know exactly how good Nebraska is. They're a 6.5-point favorite on the road in that game.
Yeah, it's just to clarify, it's a neutral site game, so it's actually it's an Arrowhead Stadium,
Kansas City, which is okay. Well, there you go. But
I had to do a double take too. I had to make sure, but because based on that 9 o'clock tip or kickoff, that made more sense. It's 8 o'clock local, right?
8 o'clock, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Nebraska is certainly one of the sexy picks this year to make that leap. They finally made a bowl game last year, right, for the first time in 10 years, whatever it's been. So are they going to make that next step under Rule? That's the other intriguing game. And I guess the game that's listed right after that, Miami versus Wisconsin, as we talked about with Wisconsin's schedule, they have to win these winnable games to just be bowl eligible this year because that back end of their schedule is really tough. So not that they're not going to win that game, but they really need to get up to a good start just to help build some momentum for them for the whole season.
Yeah, it's not a game that they can in any way, shape, or form afford to lose. Miami of Ohio is an interesting team. They, according to S&P Plus, have one of the worst, maybe the worst offense in college football, but a pretty good defense. Yeah. And what the interesting thing about Wisconsin is they didn't do a ton well last year, but they come in with a pretty good defense in terms of returning production. Their offense is still struggling. I imagine they're not going to have a whole lot of problems in that game, but we'll see what happens with that. A low get-in price. I just want to note it's a $7 get-in price right now, Camp Randall. So if anybody's in the neighborhood, you may want to check that out.
It's also a very low total for a 17.5-point spread, and it's 39.5. So they're expecting a very low scoring game, probably like 24-0 or something in that rail. Very, as you said, Miami's offense is looking really bad on the S&P Plus. So I would expect Wisconsin to win, but again, that first game, just getting off the mat, getting that win is going to be really important for their season.
Going to Friday and checking out what the options are that day, you've got Michigan State hosting Western Michigan. And, this is one of those games, again, where on paper, you see the MAC team. You're like, well, maybe they'll have a chance. Western Michigan's real bad this year. And Michigan State, a 20.5-point favorite. And that's a team that I'm kind of curious about because Michigan State, it feels like they shouldn't have been as bad as they were last year. And even with that, they had a couple of surprising results. They knocked off Iowa kind of surprisingly, I believe, earlier on in the year. But that's a game they're going to need to win, obviously, with some emphasis. But the big game for that day is really a couple of them: Auburn and Baylor. Auburn traveling to Waco, and the Hugh Freeze kind of death march, potential is high this season for Auburn. This is a guy that's on the hot seat, and you got to go at Baylor, at Oklahoma, at Texas A&M, and you got Georgia at home. That's 4 of your first 6 games of the year. I think it's a legit question. Like, does Hugh Freeze make it to Columbus Day at this point?
Yeah. I mean, this is big, right? I think it's almost, I don't want to say a must win for week 1, but for the Auburn's, like as you just said, their schedule is really difficult. Now, they're returning a lot of starters. Them in Oklahoma are those 2 teams. Like, is one of those teams going to step up and be an SEC contender? And just with their schedule, it's going to be really difficult. But both of those teams are on a hot seat for the SEC. So more here with Auburn with their opponent, but certainly another team, and I know they don't play till Saturday. But Oklahoma, that other SEC team that really needs to start off well to get going.
Auburn coming in 25th in S&P Plus, but Baylor's 35th. I'm a bit surprised, honestly, that Auburn's a 2.5-point favorite in this game to start with. Like, it feels like it should be a bit more even than that.
Yeah, there must be some really nice golf courses over there for you Freeze to play.
Georgia Tech and Colorado from Folsom Field in Boulder. That's going to be a fun one. That's not a cheap get-in price. Ticket price is $124. Georgia Tech, a 4.5-point favorite in this one. And the big question is, what does Colorado look like post Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter? And I don't think Vegas is necessarily thinking it's going to look that good.
Yeah, I have no idea what to expect. Obviously Deion's been dealing with the health concerns too, so he hasn't really been around as much. As you said, post Shedeur Sanders, I don't know what to expect out of Georgia Tech. I know they had a great year last year. Can they build on their success, taking Georgia pretty deep in that 7 overtime game to end their year? I know they played a bowl game as well, but certainly they are one of those sneaky kind of Kansas teams for the year or for the season. Can they get off to a good start by winning one of these non-conference games to build into the ACC season?
Heading to Saturday, obviously the marquee game, the big noon kickoff game, Texas at Ohio State. I've been seeing a lot. I really feels like Ohio State is a bit pumped up numbers wise. Like I really, they're Ohio State, they're the defending national champions. In terms of the punditry, they probably deserve the benefit of the doubt, but I'm surprised at all the metrics favoring Ohio State in this game. They're a 2.5-point favorite at home, which is, it's a slight, it's a slight nudge in favor of Texas in terms of neutral site there. But I wouldn't be surprised to see Texas come in and win this game rather handily. And I'm not sure what you're expecting in this one, but that's kind of where I'm leaning right now.
I think we both picked Texas in our preseason. So, I wouldn't be surprised. It just seems like Texas is more fully formed. I know Arch didn't start last year, but Arch has been there for 3 years in the system with Sark. Ohio State basically starting not from scratch, but because obviously they just reload. It's not like they're bringing in like 3 stars. They're bringing back. They have all the 5 stars. It'd be interesting to see if they lose this game. It's not going to really hurt them, right? They have still the Big Ten schedule, but how they respond over the next couple of weeks, because it's 0-1 puts you in a little bit of a hole, especially when you don't really have that margin as much as maybe you did last year when you won all your games and you still lost. You lost to Michigan, you lost to Oregon on the last play on the road. So they had these two close losses. Getting blown out may shift some opinion, but I'm in agreement with you. I don't think it's gonna be a blowout, but I do think Texas goes in there and wins.
Alabama at Florida State at 3:30. The only reason we're talking about this game is because of the brand names, not because of the football. I mean, Alabama's ranked 8th in the country. They'll be a very good team. I think it's very much a wait-and-see thing with Florida State this season. I don't know what to make of them. I don't think anybody does. They're probably not going to be as bad as they were last year, but they're also probably not going to be anywhere close to as good as they were in 2023. So I'm not even sure this is a barometer for either team, but I wonder if Florida State keeps it close. Is that more of a, wow, Florida State's good, or wow, we're still not sure about Alabama under Kalen DeBoer?
Yeah. I think Alabama goes in there, they roll tide here. I don't really expect much from Florida State. It's like you said, they're such Jekyll and Hyde. They've been one of those transfer portal teams, just like Ole Miss. It worked in year one, did not work at all last year. DJ was awful for them last year. I expect Alabama to win big here. But would I be surprised if Florida State was a little better? I would expect them to be better than 2-10. But I don't know if that's going to be enough to win this game against Alabama, even though they are home. It's, I'm sure a couple of years ago when they scheduled this game, this could be a big, great game for week one. And it's kind of tucked there in the 3:30 slot. But again, I expect Alabama to roll here.
LSU at Clemson, the other big matchup on this day. 2 top 10 teams happening at Memorial Stadium in Clemson. Clemson, 3.5-point favorite in this one, which is a little low, I guess. But this is a tough one to call, because I think as much as people look at Clemson and say that's a team that is a national title contender, they're not totally sure about them at quarterback. And then LSU, it feels like LSU's in this spot every single year.
3 in a row.
Right. And they, at the end of the year, they're going to be 9-3 or 8-4. It just kind of seems to work like clockwork with them. But they're also, again, incredibly talented, as LSU always is. So I think this game is just going to be a lot of fun. The over-under on this is 57.5. That probably portends for a pretty high-scoring game, and I wouldn't be shocked to see either of these teams win this game. It's probably the one, even more so than Texas-Ohio State, that I'm most looking forward to watching as a neutral fan in this particular slate of games.
Yeah, I love this game. I think it and I do appreciate LSU scheduling these week one games. I know hasn't helped them at all in the first 3 years they've done this, but it should be a really telling sign to see how far LSU has come. Defensively, they were one of the worst defenses in the country last year, especially in the FBS level. But Clemson's bringing back the experienced quarterback. They finally brought some transfers in after Dabo was anti-transfer. Clemson's one of my picks to go to the Final Four this year, so I think Clemson wins this game. I think it's really close. I think it's a fun game, but I'll give Clemson the edge being at home at their Death Valley in Memorial Stadium.
Only other game I'll spotlight on this particular day, Utah, UCLA. This is more of a Big 10, Big 12 comp. I'm curious to see if UCLA is better at all this year. They really got to get off on the right foot. And this is an intriguing game. This was a Pac-12 game until last year,
right?
Basically. And now it doesn't count for that conference either direction. But I'll be curious to see what happens there. That game taking place at the Rose Bowl, late game, 11 Eastern kick. On Sunday, only 2 games. Both of them are pretty intriguing. Virginia Tech at South Carolina. I'm expecting South Carolina is going to win that one fairly handily, but they struggled last year in their opening game at home against a significantly lesser opponent from Virginia in Old Dominion. So might want to put a little asterisk next to that one. That's a nice 3:00 in the afternoon Sunday game.
It's also a neutral site, so that's in Atlanta. That's the Chick-fil-A kickoff game. But I think South Carolina should roll here. And for them, I think as we talked about with their schedule earlier in our earlier episodes, it's important for them to get off the mat early here, just because it's going to help them build throughout the season.
Is it a requirement for I guess it's the Aflac kickoff special. I was going to say if it's the Chick-fil-A kickoff special, is it requirement that they have to have 2 teams with bird mascots in it?
Yeah, good point. I don't.
Yeah. Anyway, the other marquee game, and one I'm obviously going to tune. We should get together and watch this game actually for free. Notre Dame at Miami. in Miami Gardens, Hard Rock Stadium. Notre Dame ranked 6th, Miami ranked 10th. Notre Dame a 2.5-point favorite on the road in this game, which isn't that big of a deal because it's really not a home field advantage for Miami at all playing in that stadium. But it should be packed and rocking. Like, they'll get fans out for this one. And this is one of those, again, it's like we talked about Notre Dame. If they can get through this game, they've got a lot of favorable things on their schedule. And if they lose the game, it's not going to be the end of the world. I think it's for Miami, it's a game they probably have to win at this point, because I don't want to sustain through the through the ACC schedule without that victory, because right now you've only got 2 other ranked teams on your schedule. One of them's Florida, and the other one is at SMU. So you just have fewer opportunities to pick up marquee wins. I think Miami's going to win this game. I'm going to go ahead and pick that right now. Yeah. But it's a game that I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Miami, more so than Notre Dame, to try to come away with this one.
Yep. I think it's important coming off a national championship appearance for Notre Dame to get off the mat early. Obviously, new starting quarterback. They've played well when they play good teams over the last couple of years. I took Notre Dame in this game. I think this is a game they have to win. Not only because, like you said, their schedule is questionable throughout. They don't play the meat of the ACC this year as part of their agreement. For Miami, same thing. Miami, they don't leave the state really for the first 2.5 months, but it's also a big game for Miami if they can get off to a good start. They were just outside the playoffs last year. Their offense is fun to watch. I'm looking forward to this one too. We should get together for this one. I'm taking Notre Dame and the points.
There we go. And then the final one, which I'm not even going to talk about, TCU, North Carolina. I don't care. As much as I didn't care about the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce engagement at the beginning of the pod, I don't care about the Bill Belichick experience in Chapel Hill at the end of the pod.
Yep. I'll watch because it's on. Yeah. But it's at the end of Labor Day. It's,
What else am I going to do on a Monday night at the end of August? Like, serious. I guess it's the beginning of September, even more so. But anyway.
Yeah.
Good times. A lot to look forward to this weekend, as, of course, Indiana kicking off at home against Old Dominion. We'll be in attendance for that one as well. Anyway, this has been Football Weather for Matt Blaska. I'm Galen Clavio. Thanks for joining us, folks. We will catch you on the flip side. So long, everybody, and enjoy the football.
Let's go.